The woman who walked out of our wedding in front of 300 people came back into my life 4 years later as a barcode on a sample tube, and I did not know it was her until I had already read her blood and understood that she was dying. I was 27 years old. I ran the night bench in the transfusion lab at St. Bride's, and at 11 minutes past 2 in the morning, I pulled a tube out of a rack the way I had pulled 10,000 tubes before it, and I held it up to the lamp the way my grandmother taught me, and something under my sternum went very cold and very quiet, because I knew that blood. I had known it across a table in a candlelit room when I was 23 and stupid with love. And the reason my hands were not steady was not the hour and not the cold. It was that the name printed on the label said Ardagh S.
Welcome everyone! Don't forget to subscribe to the channel.
And the panel beside it said the words that meant her marrow had turned on her, and the request attached to it was for an unrelated donor search, worldwide, urgent, and in 4 years of running that bench, I had never once seen a search go out with the word urgent on it and end well. Séverine Ardagh, 38 years old, the Frost of Ardagh house, the woman whose family owned the building I was standing in, the woman who had left me at an altar in front of 300 guests without one word of explanation, and 3 streets away, in a flat with a broken radiator and a nightlight shaped like a moon, my daughter was asleep with her fist under her cheek. My daughter, who has amber eyes, and who got them from exactly one person on this earth. I'm going to tell you how a night shift lab technician ended up holding the only tissue match in the world for the alpha who abandoned her at the altar, and how that match, the one that saved Séverine Ardagh's life, was also the one thing on earth that could prove whose child I had been raising alone. I'm going to tell you how the coldest woman in the city came down off a dais in front of 400 people and a board of directors and her own mother, and knelt on a marble floor and claimed us both. But you have to let me go back, because nothing about that night makes sense until you understand the 4 years I spent believing she had simply stopped wanting me. And the one winter before that when I was very briefly the happiest I have ever been in my life. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. I want to back up properly. My name is Nell Faraday and I read blood, not the way the machines read it. The machines are better than me at almost everything, and I would never tell you otherwise. I mean the other thing. Put a tube in my hand under a good lamp and I can feel, somewhere behind my breastbone in a place that has no name and no certificate, what has happened to the person it came out of. Whether they have been bleeding slowly for months and telling nobody. Whether the iron in them has been gone so long, their body has stopped complaining about it. Whether the marrow that made those cells is doing its work honestly, or has started quietly to lie. I have never been able to put it on a form. I have spent my whole working life confirming with a machine 40 minutes later the thing I already knew at the lamp. Most people who do my job do it with good hands and good discipline and an enormous amount of patience. And they do it beautifully, and the results go up to the wards and nobody ever thinks about the room they came from. I did all of that too. But I also did the other thing. The thing that is not on my qualification and never will be. The thing that made me, by 25, the person the hematology registrars would quietly walk down 3 flights of stairs to show a slide to at 4 in the morning. I have held a tube up to a lamp and said, "This woman is bleeding somewhere. You have not looked yet," and been right. I have said, "Do not transfuse him. The problem is not the count," and been right. I do not know how to describe it in a way that does not sound like a party trick, and it is not one. Blood keeps a record, people forget that. It is the most honest tissue in the body, and it does not care at all what the person carrying it has decided to say out loud. My grandmother is the reason I can do it, and she is the reason the rest of this will make sense. So let me set her down properly before we go any further. Nan raised me. My mother was a signature on a form and a bad photograph and nothing else. And Nan had spent 31 years as a hospital laboratory hand in this city. Back when that meant standing at a bench with your own 2 eyes and a rack of tubes and no analyzer to hide behind. 31 years of being the woman in the basement who found the thing and the consultant upstairs who announced it. She never once had her name on a paper. She used to say that with no bitterness at all, the way you'd report the weather. She had a brass hemoglobin comparator, the old kind, a little hinged instrument with 2 slots and a colored standard, worn to a soft gold at the edges from 31 years in an apron pocket. The first real memory I have of being myself is standing on a milk crate at her kitchen table, with that comparator in my hands and her palm warm on my back. "Blood doesn't lie about where it came from, Nell," she said. "People will lie to your face your whole life and they'll do it smiling. But whatever's in that glass came out of a living body, and it carries everything that body's been through. It cannot help it. Your only job is to be quiet enough to let it tell you." She made it sound ordinary. "You just look properly, child. Most folk are too busy reading the label to look at the sample." I understand now that the ordinariness was the kindest and most protective thing she ever did for me, because she had watched what powerful people do to a poor woman who is gifted out loud. Nan died the February I turned 22. She left me the brass comparator, 411 pounds, and a piece of advice I did not take. And 18 months after that, at a foundation fundraiser I had been sent to, only because somebody senior had a wedding to go to, I met Séverine Ardagh. You have to understand what she was, even then, because the woman I found 4 years later on a sample label was carved out of exactly the same stone. Séverine Ardagh was 34 that winter to my 23. Her family had built half the medical infrastructure of this city, and she chaired the trust that ran it. And when she came into a room, the other alphas in it recalculated themselves and came out lower. Blue-black hair she wore off her face without one strand out of place, and amber eyes. Genuinely amber, the color of a whiskey held up to a window, so unusual that people who met her once described her by them for the rest of their lives. She spoke in short, finished sentences. In 4 years, I never heard her raise her voice, not once, not even at the end. She had a single tell, and I am the one who found it. The way you find the one warm brick in a cold wall, 2 fingers to the inside of her own left wrist, pressed once, hard, and released. If you did not know her, you would think it was a nervous habit, a woman checking a watch she was not wearing. I thought, that whole winter, that it was what she did instead of showing you something. I want you to hold on to that because I had it completely wrong. And the day I finally understood what those two fingers were doing was the day everything I had believed about being abandoned turned inside out in my hands. We met at a table with bad wine on it. I was 23 and furious about being there, in a borrowed dress at a fundraiser for a foundation whose money never seemed to reach the basement I worked in. She sat down opposite me because it was the only free chair. She asked what I did, and I told her, shortly, expecting the polite glazing over I had learned to expect. Instead, she asked me a real question about it. Then another one. Then a third that was good enough that I put my glass down. And then, because I was 23 and had drunk enough of the bad wine to be reckless, I told her that the man 3 seats to her left had been anemic for months and did not know it. She looked at me for a long moment with those amber eyes and said, "How? Not how dare you, not how funny, just how." I said the skin under his eyes, the nail beds, the way he had refused the stairs, the color of the inside of his lip. When he laughed, she turned her head, unhurried, and looked at him for about 4 seconds and turned back and said, "You are right." And then, after a pause I have thought about for years, does anyone know you can do that? Nobody had ever asked me that. Not once in my life. Every other person who had noticed had either not believed me or had quietly taken the finding upstairs with their own name on it. Séverine Ardagh, who could have bought the hospital I worked in out of the change in her accounts, sat in a borrowed folding chair at a fundraiser and asked whether anyone knew what I could do, in the tone of a woman who had just found something valuable left out in the rain. Then she put 2 fingers to the inside of her own wrist, pressed once, and let go. That was the winter. I am not going to pretend it was slow or careful, because it was neither. She started coming to the lab, not to the office upstairs where her name was on a plaque, down to the basement at 11 at night in a coat worth more than my car, to stand at the end of my bench and watch me work and argue with me about whether what I did was a skill or a superstition. She brought me things to read. She brought me difficult samples the way another woman might bring flowers, and she did not once pretend she was doing anything else, and I have never in my life been courted better. She learned the way I hold a tube, and I learned the 2 fingers on the wrist. By March, she had a key to my flat and a drawer in it. By May, she had met exactly nobody on her side of the world, and I had stopped asking why. By July, she asked me to marry her in the basement at 2 in the morning with the analyzer running behind us. And she did it badly and without a ring because she had not planned it. And that is the single best moment of my life. And I would not trade it for anything that has happened since. I said yes before she finished the sentence. I want that on the record. Whatever else you think of me by the end of this, I said yes before she finished the sentence. And I meant it all the way down to the floor. Her mother is the next thing you need. And I am going to try to be fair about her, which is harder than it sounds. Matilda Ardagh was 61 that year and chaired the Ardagh Foundation, which is the charitable face the family shows the city. And she had run the whole apparatus, the trust, the hospital board, the family, her daughter, for 30 years with a courtesy so total, It took me a long time to recognize it as a weapon. She never once raised her voice to me either. That is a family trait. It turns out you can do a great deal of damage at a conversational volume. She invited me to lunch 3 weeks after the engagement was announced. Just the two of us, at a restaurant where the tablecloths were heavier than my coat. She was gracious for 50 minutes. She asked after my grandmother, whose name she had learned. She said, and I believe she meant it, that Séverine had been different since she met me, and that she had not known her daughter could look like that. And then she put down her fork and said, in exactly the same warm tone, that she wanted me to understand that the Ardagh name came with obligations that were not romantic, and that when the time came, she hoped I would be sensible about what the family needed. I told her, 23 years old and glowing with it, that what the family needed was not really my concern because I was not marrying the family. She smiled at me with enormous kindness and said, "No, you are not." And she paid the bill and kissed my cheek, and I walked out into the street feeling like I had won something. I had not won anything. I had told her exactly which lever to pull, and she had put her hand on it, and she waited 11 months. The wedding was in the December. St. Aldhelm's, 300 people, most of them hers. I want to be careful here because I have told this part of the story very few times, and never all the way through. I had a dress that Nan would have wept over. I had my grandmother's brass comparator sewn into the lining at the hip, which I have never told anyone because it was the only family I had to bring. I stood in a cold vestry with a florist I had known for 1 week, and I was so happy I felt slightly sick with it. She did not come. That is the short version, and for 4 years, it was the only version I had. Séverine Ardagh, who had never in her life been late for anything, was 40 minutes late and then an hour. And then her mother came into the vestry with her coat still on and her face arranged into something that was almost grief, and told me that Séverine had gone, that she had left the city that morning, that she was very sorry, and that these things happen and are nobody's fault. I did not scream. I've thought about that a great deal since. I stood in a cold stone room in a dress with my grandmother sewn into the hip, and I asked, in a voice I did not recognize, whether she was hurt. Matilda said no. I asked whether she had said anything. Matilda said, "She said it was better this way." And then 300 people were told by somebody who was not me. And I walked out of a side door into a December afternoon and got on a bus in the dress because I had not thought to arrange any other way home. A woman on that bus gave me her scarf and did not ask a single question. And I have never forgotten her, and I never learned her name. Here is what I want you to hold on to, because everything turns on it. For 4 years, I believed a very simple story. She had looked at what she was about to do and had come to her senses, and the kindest thing she could think of was to do it fast. It was a story that hurt in a clean way. It had a shape. I could carry it. I was wrong about every single part of it, and the truth was sitting in a locked drawer 9 floors above the room where I worked the whole time. 3 weeks after the wedding that did not happen, I found out I was pregnant. I want to be honest about how I took it because the honest version is not flattering. I sat on the floor of my bathroom for about 2 hours. I was 23, I had 400 pounds and a night shift contract, and I had just been left in front of 300 people by a woman whose family could remove me from the city by making one telephone call. And underneath the panic, there was something else. Something I did not have a word for then, and I do now. I was not afraid of having her child. I was afraid of what it would mean that I still wanted to. I wrote to her. I want that on the record too. I did not send a lawyer, and I did not sell it to anyone, and I did not go to the press, all of which I was later accused of considering. I wrote her a letter, by hand, 4 pages, and I said that I was pregnant and that I was not asking her for anything, and that she was allowed to want nothing to do with it, and that I would raise it either way, but that she was going to be told because I was not going to be a woman who let someone find out from a stranger in 15 years. I did not beg. I read that letter back before I sealed it, and I was proud of it. And I have been grateful ever since that I wrote a letter I could be proud of. I posted it to the house, recorded delivery because I was not a fool, and I kept the little slip in the tin with Nan's comparator. And then I waited, and nothing came back. And after 9 weeks, I stopped checking the post before I took my coat off. What came instead, at the end of the 10th week, was Matilda Ardagh, in person, in the corridor outside my flat, on a Tuesday evening, with a driver waiting downstairs. She was again extremely kind. She said she had heard. She said she was so sorry for the position I had been put in. She said Séverine was abroad and would be for some time, and that she had been made aware of my situation and had asked her mother to handle it, and that she wished me well, but did not wish to be contacted again. She said all of this standing in a corridor with a broken light, and then she took an envelope out of her bag and offered it to me, and told me the figure without opening it. And it was more money than my grandmother earned in 31 years of finding things in a basement for other people to sign. I want to tell you, I said something magnificent. I did not. I asked her one question. I asked whether Séverine had read my letter, and Matilda Ardagh looked at me with real compassion in her face and said, "Yes, she read it." And that was the moment, standing in a corridor with a broken light at 23 years old and 11 weeks pregnant, that something in me closed like a door in a draft. I took the envelope out of her hand. I tore it in half in front of her, and in half again, and I put the pieces into her open palm. And I said, "Tell her I never asked her for anything, and I still haven't." And I shut my door. She had not read it. Séverine Ardagh never saw one word of that letter, and she was not abroad. And on the evening her mother stood in my corridor, she was 90 minutes away in a private ward with a cannula in the back of her hand. I did not learn any of that for 4 years. I want you to sit in the wrong version with me a little longer, though, because I lived in it for a very long time, and it is the wrong version that raised my daughter. Her name is Wilhelmina, which was Nan's name, and she has been Billy since she was about 9 minutes old. She was born in June at St. Bride's, 4 floors above the lab I worked in, at 5:10 in the morning. And the first thing I did after they put her on my chest, before I counted her fingers, before anything, was look at her eyes. Newborn eyes are usually a sort of slate, nothing that decides later what it wants to be. Billy's did not. Billy came out of me with amber eyes, whiskey held up against a window, and I lay there in a delivery room at 5:10 in the morning and laughed until I cried. Because of course she had. Of course she had. We were fine. I want to say that clearly because there is a version of this story where I am pitiable and it is not the true one. It was hard, in the ways it is hard for everybody who does it alone on a night shift salary. The childcare arithmetic, the flat with the radiator that only worked in one room, the 3 years I did not buy myself anything. But I had a job I was extraordinary at. I had a small handful of people who showed up, and I had a daughter who talked early and constantly and had opinions about the color of her socks. The two who showed up matter later, so meet them now. Tam Okafor came onto the night bench the year Billy was born, 30, endlessly capable. The only person at St. Bride's who ever said out loud in a meeting that I should be running the department. And Aggie Moreland, who was 68 by then and had been the night matron of that building for 34 years before she retired into a part-time post in the records office because she could not bear to leave. Aggie had known my grandmother. Aggie called Billy the small professor. And Aggie Moreland, though I did not know it, had been keeping something in a locked drawer in the records office for 4 years, waiting to find out whether she would ever be allowed to give it to me. For 4 years. The Ardagh name was a thing I stepped over. It was on the front of my building. It was on the headed paper. Twice a year, the foundation held its gala in the atrium, and I worked those nights on purpose, down in the basement with the door shut, and I never once looked at a photograph. Billy asked, at 3.5, in the direct and devastating way of a child who has just worked out that other people have too, where her other mother was. And I told her the truth as I understood it, which is that her other mother had not been able to stay, and that it was not because of anything Billy was. She thought about this for a while, and then asked if her other mother had amber eyes too, and I said yes, and she nodded, satisfied, and asked for toast. That is where we were. A flat with one warm room, a small professor with her father's, with her mother's eyes, a brass comparator in a tin, and a story about being left that I had sanded smooth enough to carry. And then, on the 11th of November, at 2 in the morning, a porter brought a rack down to the night bench with a red urgent sticker on it, and I pulled out a tube and held it up to the lamp. I knew before I read the label. I want to be precise about that, because it is the only part of this that still frightens me. I held that tube up to the lamp, and my body knew, the way you know a footstep in a corridor, and only afterwards did my eyes go down to the printed name. Ardagh, S. Date of birth. A hospital number that had been in the system a long time, and a full panel request with the word urgent on it in red. At 2 in the morning, ordered from a private ward on the 9th floor of a building her family had paid for. Here is what the blood said. and it said it before any machine confirmed a word of it. It said this marrow has been failing for a long time. Not weeks, not months, years. It said this has been managed carefully by somebody who knew exactly what they were doing, and it has been managed at the very edge of what management can do, and the edge has now been reached. It said whoever this is has been walking around, going to meetings, chairing boards, being photographed, while the factory that makes their blood quietly gave up in stages. And then, because my hands do things while my mind is elsewhere, I ran the panel properly, and 40 minutes later the analyzer agreed with me in numbers, and one of the numbers was low enough that I stood up from the stool without deciding to. Tam found me in the cold room, not doing anything, just standing between the racks with my hands flat on the steel shelf. She looked at the screen on the bench and then at me and said my name once, carefully, and I said, I know her. And Tam, who is a better person than I am, did not ask a single question for about 4 minutes. Then she said, do you need to not be here? And I said, no. I said, somebody's got to read it right. Which was true, and was also the first excuse in a long chain of excuses I told myself over the next 11 days. I want to explain what I was actually looking at, because the whole rest of this depends on it, and I am not going to make you take it on faith. Séverine Ardagh had a marrow that had stopped making blood properly. There's a family of conditions like that, and some of them are inherited. And the treatment that actually fixes them, not manages, fixes, is to take out the broken factory and put in somebody else's. For that, you need a donor whose tissue type matches yours very closely. Not a blood group, tissue type. It is a set of markers you inherit in a block from each of your parents, and matching a stranger closely enough is a lottery with terrible odds, which is why there are registries with millions of people on them. And here is the thing that the entire rest of my life turned on, and I knew it standing in that cold room at 3 a.m, the way you know a sentence you have not said yet. A perfect match is very rare in a stranger. It is common in a sibling. And it is not a lottery at all in a parent or a child, because a child gets exactly 1 block from each parent, which means a child is always a guaranteed half match. And sometimes, depending on which blocks the parents carry, very much better than that. I put the 2 back in the rack. I finished my shift. I went home at 7 a.m, and my neighbor handed my daughter over at the door with her coat already on, and Billy told me a very long story about a bird. And I made toast and cut it into triangles because squares are wrong. And I sat across the little table from a 3.5-year-old with amber eyes and thought, I am the only person on this earth who knows both halves of this. I did nothing for 4 days. I am not going to dress that up. I went to work, I read other people's blood, I walked past the 9th floor twice a shift. I told myself a version of things in which none of it was mine to touch. She had left me, her mother had bought me off, the family had a private team and money without end, and no need of a night shift technician from the basement. There are 1,100 beds in that hospital. It was not my business. I said that to myself so many times over 4 days that it developed the smooth, worn feel of a stone in a pocket. On the 5th day, the foundation announced the donor drive, and it stopped being possible to pretend. They did not name her. That was the whole art of it. The Ardagh Foundation announced a citywide stem cell registry campaign in partnership with the National Registry, with a personal appeal from the chair, a member of our own family, and it was on the side of buses within a week. Swab drives in the atrium, swab drives at the university, a number to text. Matilda Ardagh, 65 now, elegant and steady in front of a bank of microphones, saying that no family should have to wait, and that she was asking the city her family had served for 100 years to open its mouth for 30 seconds and give somebody a chance. It was, I want to be fair, a genuinely good campaign. 11,000 people registered in a fortnight. Some of them will have gone on to save the lives of strangers they will never meet. And that is real, and Matilda Ardagh did that. I have thought about this a great deal, and I have decided that both things can be true. She built something good in public with one hand, and with the other hand, she had a letter in a drawer. The drives were held in the atrium of my building. That is how it reached my daughter. And I did not arrange it, and I want that understood by everybody who later said otherwise. St. Bride's ran a staff and family session on a Saturday morning. Swab your cheek, sign the form, go and have a free bun. And the nursery Billy went to 2 days a week shared the site. And there was a table with stickers on it, and Billy wanted a sticker. I stood in that atrium for a long moment with my hand on my daughter's shoulder, under a 4-meter banner with the Ardagh name on it. And I understood exactly and completely what I was standing on the edge of. Nobody made me do it. I want to say that clearly because of what I was accused of later. I looked at the table and the stickers and the woman with the swab kits, and I made a decision. At 11 o'clock on a Saturday morning with my 3.5-year-old pulling at my sleeve, I signed the form. Under the parent consent section, in my own handwriting, in front of 2 witnesses, and I put my own name and my own contact details. And I did not put anybody else's name anywhere on that document because there was nobody else to put. Billy opened her mouth and let a stranger rub the inside of her cheek for 30 seconds and was extremely brave about it and got a sticker of a rocket. And we went and had a bun. I did not run the sample. It went to the National Registry like all of them, and the typing was done in a laboratory 200 miles away by people who had never heard of either of us. And that fact is the only reason anyone believed me at the end. If I had touched it, if I had so much as carried the rack, Matilda Ardagh would have had a story. And it would have been a good one. It took 19 days. 19 days in which I read other people's blood and did not sleep properly. And twice stood outside the lift to the 9th floor with my badge in my hand and did not raise it to the reader. 19 days in which the woman on the 9th floor got quietly worse, which I knew because I was still the one reading her counts, which is a thing I should have declared and did not, and which I would do again. On the 20th day, the registry flagged a match, and because of how these things are structured, the flag came back to the transplant center, which is on the 4th floor of St. Bride's. and the transplant coordinator's office sent a routine note down to the lab asking for confirmatory typing on a local sample. Tam brought it to me. She had already seen the numbers. She put the printout down on the bench in front of me, and she did not sit. And she said very quietly, "Nell, that is not a good match. That is a 10 out of 10. A 10 out of 10 in an unrelated stranger happens. It is rare and wonderful, and it happens. But a 10 out of 10 in a 3-year-old whose mother is standing in the room when the recipient is a woman that mother was once engaged to is not a coincidence. And Tam Okafor is not stupid. She looked at the printout and she looked at me, and I watched her put it together in about 6 seconds. And then she sat down on the stool opposite me and said, "Oh, Nell," I told her all of it out loud for the first time in 4 years at 3:30 in the morning in a basement to a colleague I had never once been to dinner with. She listened the whole way through without interrupting, which is a rarer skill than reading blood, and at the end of it she said one sentence that I have thought about every day since. She said, "So the thing that proves it is the same thing that saves her." That is exactly it. There was no version of this in which I could give Séverine Ardagh what she needed without telling her what I had. The match was the reveal. You cannot hand a woman a marrow that matches her at 10 out of 10 and expect her to believe the child it came from is a stranger's. It is not possible. Any hematologist in the building would look at those numbers and ask the only question those numbers permit. So the choice in front of me at 3:30 in the morning was very simple and very cruel. I could say nothing, and the search would continue, and it might find somebody in time, and it might not. Or I could open a door that I had spent 4 years nailing shut and walk through it carrying my daughter. I want to tell you about the 2 nights in between because I have never been more ashamed of anything, and I am telling this properly or not at all. The first night I decided not to do it. I sat on the floor of Billy's room with my back against her bed while she slept, and I built the whole case. She left me. She let her mother buy me off in a corridor. She read 4 handwritten pages telling her she had a child coming, and she sent her mother with an envelope. My daughter did not owe that woman a bone marrow harvest under general anesthetic. My daughter did not owe her a cheek swab. Everything in that case was true, based on what I knew, and I want you to notice that it was airtight, and that it was built entirely out of one lie that Matilda Ardagh told me in a corridor with a broken light. The second night, I understood the thing that broke it. I was rereading the counts, and I got to the historic values, because the 9th floor had been sending samples down for years under a private code. And once I knew what I was looking at, I could go back through the record. And I found the first abnormal result. And I sat and looked at the date of it for a very long time. It was 5 days before our wedding. 5 days. She had a marrow biopsy in a private clinic on the other side of the city. 5 days before she was supposed to stand up in St. Aldhelm's in front of 300 people and marry me. And the results are in the record. And I read them at 4 in the morning 4 years later on the bench where I found out she was dying. And I sat there with my grandmother's voice in my ear. Blood doesn't lie about where it came from. And I understood that I had spent 4 years reading one single piece of evidence completely wrong. She did not leave me because she stopped wanting me. Whatever else was true, she did not leave me for the reason I had built my entire adult life around. Nobody gets a result like that 5 days before their wedding and walks out of it for a reason as small as a change of heart. I went and found Aggie Moreland at 7 in the morning in the records office because Aggie had been in that building for 34 years. And there is nothing that happens in a hospital that the night matron does not eventually hear about. I asked her, without any preamble at all, whether she remembered anything about the December of the wedding. Aggie Moreland took her glasses off and put them down, and looked at me for a long moment and said, "I have been waiting 4 years for you to ask me that." Then she got up and unlocked the bottom drawer of a gray cabinet in the corner of the records office and took out a hardback mail register, the old kind with a marbled cover, and put it on the desk in front of me and turned it round. Every item of recorded post that came into that building and into the family's registered office, which shares the address, was signed into that register, line by line, dated, initialed. And on a Thursday in the January 4 years earlier, in Aggie Moreland's own handwriting, there was a line for one recorded delivery item, addressed to S. Ardagh, and the signature in the received column was not Severine's. It was Sir Ardagh. And in the remarks column, in the same neat hand, Aggie had written 6 words, "Collected by chair, not forwarded, queried." I said, "Queried?" And Aggie said, in the flattest voice I have ever heard her use, I asked her twice whether it should go up to Miss Séverine. The second time she told me it had been dealt with and that I should attend to my own department. And then Aggie Moreland said, "Nell, I watched her put it in her bag. I have thought about that letter every week for 4 years. I did not know what was in it. I knew it was yours because I know your hand from the request forms, and I knew you were not the sort to write twice." I asked her why she kept the register. She said, "Because I have worked for that family since I was 34 years old, and I have learned that the only thing they cannot argue with is a document with their own name on it. So now I had 2 things. I had a biopsy result dated 5 days before my wedding, and I had a line in a mail register proving that the letter I sent, the one I had been told for 4 years that she had read, had been intercepted by her mother and never went up. And I had a 3-year-old asleep at a childminder's 4 streets away who was a 10 out of 10 match for a dying woman. And I did the thing I should probably have done 4 years earlier and did not have the standing to do. I went up to the 9th floor. I did it badly. I want that on the record, too. I did not plan it. I came off a night shift at 7:10 in the morning, in scrubs, with a mail register under my arm, and I got into the lift and put my badge on the reader, and it worked, because a senior biomedical scientist's badge opens the clinical floors, and nobody stops a woman in scrubs walking quickly. There was a nurse at the station who looked up, and I said the only true thing I had, which was, "I'm from the lab. I need to speak to the patient in 9, and she let me pass. And I have thought since that she must have assumed I was bringing a result. I was, I suppose. I was bringing a result." She was sitting up. That is the first thing, not lying, sitting up in a chair by the window in her own clothes, with a laptop on a table and a cannula taped to the back of her left hand, working at 7:10 in the morning like a woman with somewhere to be. Her hair was shorter. She was thinner in a way that would only be obvious to somebody who had known the shape of her shoulders. And she looked up and saw me standing in her doorway in scrubs with a mail register under my arm. And Séverine Ardagh, who had left me at an altar in front of 300 people and never sent one word, went absolutely white and put 2 fingers to the inside of her own left wrist and pressed. Neither of us said anything for what felt like a very long time and was probably 4 seconds. Then she said my name. Just that. Nell. And her voice did the thing that voices do when they have been kept steady for a long time and are suddenly asked to do something else. I did not go in. I stood in the doorway and I heard myself say, in a voice like somebody reading out a result, "You have a plastic marrow failure and it is not new. Your first abnormal count is dated the 9th of December 4 years ago." And she closed her eyes. She did not deny it, and she did not ask how I had it. She closed her eyes, and after a moment she said, 5 days before. And I said 5 days before. And then Séverine Ardagh opened her eyes and said the sentence that took 4 years of my life apart. She said, "I did not want you to spend your 20s watching me die. I want to hold there for a second, because you have been in the wrong version of the story with me since the beginning, and this is the moment it turned over in my hands. And I would like you to feel it turn." She told me the rest sitting in a chair by a window with a cannula in her hand, in short finished sentences, the way she said everything. She had been tired for a year and had put it down to work. Her mother had noticed before she had. The biopsy was on a Wednesday, and the result came on the Friday. And it was the bad kind, the inherited kind, the kind that runs in a family. And it does run in that family. And her mother's brother died of it at 41, and Matilda Ardagh had spent 30 years knowing exactly what she was watching for. And on the Saturday morning, in the 4 hours before the wedding, her mother had sat her down with the report and made the case that the disease was heritable, that a child of hers had a real chance of carrying it, that marrying me would be tying a 23-year-old with no money and no family to a woman who is going to need nursing within a decade, that the kind thing, the only decent thing available to a person in her position, was to end it cleanly and immediately and let me have a life, and that a slow explanation would only mean a slow argument that I would win, because I was 23 and in love, and I would insist on staying. So I let her be right, Séverine said. It took her about 90 minutes. I have had 4 years to find the flaw in it, and I have never once been able to. She was right about every single fact. She was only wrong about one thing, which is that it was mine to decide. I said, and I am not proud of the way it came out, "You could have told me." And she said, "Yes." No defense, just yes. And then I told myself I was being kind. I was being a coward with excellent reasons. There is a difference, and it took me 2 years to find it. Then I asked the question. I had the register under my arm, and I had not opened it, and I asked it out loud first because I wanted to hear her answer it before she knew I could check. I said, "Did you read my letter?" And Séverine Ardagh looked at me with absolutely no comprehension in her face at all and said, "What letter? I have read blood for a living for 9 years. I know what an honest sample looks like." There was nothing in her face. Not the flicker of a woman deciding how much to admit. Nothing. The blank open confusion of somebody who has been handed a word in a language she does not speak. And I stood in the doorway of a private room on the 9th floor and felt 4 years of very carefully built architecture come down in one piece. I put the mail register on the end of her bed and opened it to the Thursday in January and turned it round. She read it 3 times. I watched her do it. Then she put 2 fingers on the inside of her wrist and pressed and did not let go and said, in a voice with nothing at all in it, "What was in the letter, Nell?" And that is when I found out that I was not brave. I stood there and I could not say it. I had rehearsed it on the bus, in the lift, in the corridor, and standing in front of her, I could not put the sentence together because the moment I said it out loud, it would stop being mine. So I took my phone out of my scrub pocket and I found the photograph from the previous Saturday morning. Billy in the atrium, under the banner, with a rocket sticker on her jumper, and both her hands full of bun. And I held it out. Séverine took the phone, and I watched the coldest woman in the city look at a photograph of a 3.5-year-old with honey-colored hair and amber eyes. And I watched her understand it in stages. And I watched her stop being able to hold her face together, which I had never seen happen in 4 years of loving her, and had assumed was not possible. She said, "How old?" I said, 3 years and 5 months. And she did the arithmetic out loud, twice, in a whisper, the way you check a figure you cannot accept. And then she said, "What is her name?" And I said, "Wilhelmina, Billy." After my grandmother, Anne Séverine Ardagh, put her hand over her mouth and sat in a chair by a window, with a cannula taped to the back of it, and cried without making any sound at all. I did not stay long. There is a limit to how much can be done in a doorway, and we had both reached it. But before I left, she said one more thing, and it is the reason I did what I did next instead of walking away for a second time. She said, "Nell, do not decide anything today about whether I get to see her. I have not earned it, and I am not asking. I want you to know that I know that." Quick note before we go on. Nobody in that family had ever said a sentence like that to me. Not one. I went home. I slept 4 hours. I woke up at 2 in the afternoon with my heart going and lay in the dark of a flat with the curtains shut. And I did the sum that every person in my position has to do eventually. Not the emotional sum, the practical one. There was a woman on the 9th floor who was going to die inside a year without a transplant. And my daughter was the best match on the planet. And I was going to have to decide what that meant. Let me be very clear about what I understood because I understood it properly and I want you to as well. A 3.5-year-old cannot consent. Not to anything. There is a whole apparatus around this, and it exists for extremely good reasons. An independent advocate appointed for the child alone, a clinical ethics committee, a process that is designed from top to bottom to assume that adults will justify almost anything if they want it enough. And I had watched that apparatus work from the inside for 9 years, and I believed in it. And I also knew that in a hospital with that family's name over the door, an ethics process could be a formality or a fortress, depending entirely on who wanted what. So I sat on my own bathroom floor for the second time in 4 years. The first time had been a positive test, and I made a rule. I decided that I would put the truth on the table, all of it, and then I would not advocate for a single outcome. I would not push my daughter forward, and I would not pull her back. I would tell the truth and let the people whose whole job is protecting children do their job. And if they said no, I would accept it without one word of argument, even if it killed her. I want to be honest. I made that rule because I did not trust myself. I was in love with the woman on the 9th floor. I had been in love with her for 4 years through the worst thing anybody had ever done to me. If I let myself have an opinion about whether my daughter should be anesthetized, I would not be able to tell where the love stopped and the reasoning started. I telephoned the transplant coordinator the next morning and declared the whole thing: my relationship to the recipient, my access to her results, the fact that I had been reading her counts for 11 days and should not have been, the parental consent form, everything. It took 40 minutes, and it was the single most humiliating professional conversation of my life. And at the end of it, I was stood down from all hematology work with immediate effect, which was correct, and which I had expected, and which still made me sit in my car in the staff park for 20 minutes afterwards. Tam texted me at 4 that afternoon. She said, "You did it the right way and it cost you the most. That is generally how you can tell." Séverine refused. I found out 3 days later from the coordinator in a formal meeting with 2 other people in the room. The recipient had declined to proceed with evaluation of the identified pediatric donor, categorically, in writing. And when I asked, because I could not stop myself, whether a reason had been given, the coordinator looked at her notes and read it out. And I am going to give you the sentence exactly as it was written because I have it. And I will have it until I die. The donor is a 3-year-old child who does not know me. She is not a resource. If I have to be the kind of person who takes her marrow to survive, I would rather not survive, and I am entirely clear-headed about that, and would like it recorded. I sat in a small room with 2 strangers and a box of tissues on the table, and did not cry, and went out to my car, and cried for a long time in the staff park where I had cried 3 days earlier for entirely different reasons. Because here is what that sentence meant, and I understood it immediately, the way I understand a tube under a lamp. Séverine Ardagh had just been handed the one thing that would save her life, and she had refused it in writing before she had ever laid eyes on my daughter. Not after meeting her, not after any of it. She had refused it while still just about capable of pretending she did not care. And she had used a word, resource, that told me she had understood precisely what her mother had done to me 4 years earlier, and had decided, in a private room on a 9th floor, that she would rather die than be that. I drove to the childminders, and I picked up my daughter, and I sat her at the little table in the one warm room in our flat, with toast cut into triangles, and I said, Billy, do you remember when you asked me about your other mother? I am not going to dramatize the conversation. It took 9 minutes, and most of it was about whether her other mother liked dinosaurs. Children take the enormous facts of their lives at the size they are actually offered. I told her that her other mother's name was Séverine, that she had been very poorly for a long time and was in the hospital where Mummy worked, that she had not known Billy existed until last week, and that she had cried when she found out because she was so glad. All of which was true. And Billy said, "Is she still poorly?" And I said, "Yes." And Billy thought about that with the whole of her face and said, "Then we should go." They met on a Tuesday in a family room on the 9th floor with a window and a low table and a box of extremely tired toys. And I have never been so frightened of anything in my life. Séverine had asked for 2 things. She had asked that it not be in her room because she did not want a small child's first memory of her to be a hospital bed. And she had asked whether she could be told everything about Billy beforehand. Everything, all of it, 4 years of it, so that she would not have to ask a 3-year-old a single question she should already have known the answer to. I spent 2 hours the night before writing it out. What she eats, what she is afraid of, the bird story, the socks. She was standing when we came in. She had had the cannula taken out for it, and there was a small round dressing on the back of her hand, and she was standing up with her hands behind her back like a woman waiting for a verdict. And Billy, who has never in her life been shy, walked into the middle of the room and looked up at a tall woman with blue-black hair and amber eyes and said, "You have my eyes." And Séverine Ardagh, I want you to understand the size of this, got down on the floor, all the way down onto a hospital carpet, in front of a 3-year-old on legs that were not really up to it, and got her face level with my daughter's and said, "No, you have mine. I am sorry I was late." They played with the tired toys for 50 minutes. That is the whole of it. There was no music, and nobody said anything enormous. At one point, Billy put a plastic dinosaur into Severine's hand and told her, with great seriousness, that this one was the one who was in charge. And Séverine accepted it and asked several sensible follow-up questions about the dinosaur's responsibilities. And I sat in a plastic chair by the door with my hand over my mouth and watched 4 years come apart quietly on a hospital carpet. At the end, Billy got tired the way they do, all at once, and came and put her forehead against my knee, and Séverine got up off the floor carefully with one hand on the low table and looked at me over my daughter's head and did not say anything at all. And I understood that she was not going to ask me for a single thing, not that day and not ever. She had decided somewhere in 4 years of being quietly ill that she had used up her allocation of asking. So I said it. I said Tuesday. We could come on Tuesdays. And Séverine Ardagh put 2 fingers to the inside of her wrist and pressed and said, "Yes, thank you. Tuesdays," in the voice of somebody who has been handed considerably more than they expected to survive the day with. We had 6 Tuesdays. I want to give them their weight, because everything after this is noise and machinery, and those 6 Tuesdays are the actual story. Séverine learned, my daughter. She learned that Billy will not be rushed and will not be babied and can be reasoned with about almost anything if you give her the real reason. She learned to do the voices in the bird book. She was, and I did not expect this at all, extremely funny with a 3-year-old, dry and completely serious, and treating every absurd statement as a proposition to be examined, which is exactly the correct way to be funny at a 3-year-old, and almost nobody can do it. And she got worse. Every Tuesday, a little worse. By the 4th, she was sitting when we arrived instead of standing. By the 6th, there was a bruise on her forearm the shape of a thumbprint that she had not noticed getting. And I saw it and had to go and stand in the corridor for a minute. We did not talk about us. Twice, we came close. The second time was on the 5th Tuesday, with Billy asleep on the sofa in the family room. And Séverine said, without looking at me, I have thought of 9 ways to say it, and they are all obscene. And I said, then don't. Not while you're ill. I'm not going to be able to tell what I mean. And she said, no, neither am I. And that was the whole conversation. And it was the right one. And I would make the same call again. Meanwhile, the registry search went on. And the campaign her mother had built went on, and 11,000 became 19,000. And the coordinator's office worked through the list of possibles, and the possibles came back 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10, one that looked good and then failed on a secondary marker. That is how it goes. Most people never find anybody, and Matilda Ardagh found out about us in the 5th week. And everything turned. I want to be precise about how she found out, because it matters. She did not find out about the child from a friendly nurse. She found out about the refusal. Somebody on the clinical side, entirely properly, escalated the fact that an identified 10 out of 10 pediatric donor had been declined by the recipient, because that is an extraordinary thing to happen, and there are people whose job it is to make sure nobody is being coerced into refusing treatment. And Matilda Ardagh sat on the hospital board, and she asked one question and then another, and inside about 6 hours, she had the whole shape of it. She came to my flat again, 4 years later, the same corridor, the same broken light, which someone had still not fixed. And I want to tell you that I was ready for her. I was not. I opened the door with a tea towel in my hand, and my daughter singing in the bath through an open door. And Matilda Ardagh stood in my corridor and was, for the 3rd time in my life, extremely kind to me. Extremely. She said she had not known. She said it, and I have gone over it 100 times. And I think it may even have been true in the narrowest possible sense. She had not known there was a child because she had never opened the letter. She had taken it out of the mail register and destroyed it without reading it, on principle, because it was from me. There is something in that. I still cannot get all the way round. Then she made her offer. And it was so much better than the first one that I understood I was dealing with somebody who had spent 4 years getting better at this. She did not offer me money to disappear. She offered me everything. Acknowledgement of the child, a trust in Billy's name, a house, a senior post at the foundation with a title I would not have to work for. She offered in a corridor with a broken light to make me and my daughter formally and publicly part of the Ardagh family, on one condition. The condition was that I persuade Séverine to accept the donation. I said no. I said it faster than I have ever said anything. And Matilda Ardagh, who had been kind for 4 minutes, stopped being kind and said the thing she had actually come to say. She said, "Then you will forgive me for saying what everyone else in that building is already thinking. You put a 3-year-old into a registry drive run by my family, in my building, under my banner. And 19 days later, that child came back as the one match in the world. You will find, Miss Faraday, that when this is looked at properly, it does not look like devotion. It looks like a woman who spent 4 years holding a card and waiting to be dealt a good hand." And then she said, "I am going to say so publicly because my daughter is dying and I have run out of gentler options." She was going to accuse me in front of the board in the city and the press of having conceived and concealed a child in order to leverage a claim on the Ardagh estate at the exact moment the family was most vulnerable. And the worst part, the part I lay awake with, is that if you did not know one single thing about me, it was a coherent story. It fit the facts. It fit better than the truth does. I did not sleep. I sat at the kitchen table in the one warm room with Nan's brass comparator in my hands and turned it over and over. And at about 4 a.m, I stopped panicking and started doing the only thing I have ever been good at, which is reading what is actually in front of me instead of what everybody has agreed is there. Blood does not lie about where it came from. Neither does paper if you have enough of it, and if you get it from people who have no reason to protect you. So I spent 9 days building the only defense a person like me can build against a family like that. And I did it the way Nan would have done it, in a basement, on my own time, with documents that had somebody else's name on them. 1. The parental consent form from the Saturday drive. My handwriting, my name, my address, my telephone number, 2 staff witnesses, and nowhere on it, not in any field, not in any margin, the word Ardagh. A woman positioning a child for a claim writes the name down. It is the entire point. I had not written it because it had never once occurred to me, and the absence of it was the truest thing on the page. 2. Chain of custody. Every sample from that drive went to the National Registry Laboratory 200 miles away, and their intake log records who handled what and when, and my name is not on any line of it. And I obtained that log through a formal request in my own name, which is a thing that goes on a record and cannot be quietly removed later. 3. The date. Billy was swabbed on the Saturday. The foundation had announced the drive on the Tuesday before, with no name attached to it. I obtained the foundation's own press timeline from its own published archive, which meant that on the day I signed that form, the only way I could have known whose life it was for was if somebody had told me, and the only person who could have told me was the woman in the private ward, who had not spoken to me in 4 years. 4. Aggie's mail register, which I photographed page by page, and which Aggie Moreland then insisted on lodging formally with the hospital's records office, with a covering statement in her own hand, because she said, and I am quoting her, "If I only show it to you, it is gossip. If I put it in the system, it is evidence, and they cannot make me unwrite it. 5. The biopsy date, not the result. I had no right to that, and I did not take it. Just the date, which was in the appointment system, 5 days before a wedding at St. Aldhelm's that 300 people had been invited to. And 6, which I did not build, and did not deserve, and did not know about until the night it happened. The Ardagh Foundation Winter Gala is held in the atrium of St. Bride's on the first Friday in December, under the glass roof, with 400 people at round tables, and the board on a low dais at the north end. It is the single largest fundraising night in the city, and it has run without a break since 1927. That year, it was also explicitly the closing night of the donor campaign. 19,000 registrations, a number on a screen 4 meters high, and Matilda Ardagh scheduled to speak at 9 o'clock about what a city can do when it is asked properly. I was not invited. I was, however, rostered because I had been moved off hematology onto general night cover. And general night cover on gala night means you are in the building. I have wondered since whether that was arranged. I have decided it does not matter. At 8:20, my phone went. It was Tam. She said 4 words. Nell, come up now. I came up the back stairs in scrubs with my badge swinging and came out of the service door at the south end of the atrium into 400 people and a string quartet and a glass roof full of December sky. And the first thing I saw was my daughter. Billy was on the far side of the room in the good dress, holding the hand of a woman I had never met. And she was fine. She was, in fact, having an excellent time. And it took me a full second to understand what I was looking at, and another second to stop myself from crossing that floor at a run. Aggie Moreland reached me first and took hold of my arm above the elbow, hard. She said, very fast and very low, "The chair sent a card to your childminders at 7 with a letter on foundation paper saying you had authorized it. Sonia rang me because she could not reach you. I came in. She is not hurt and she has not been out of my sight for 10 minutes. I want to be careful here because I have had years to think about what Matilda Ardagh was doing. And I do not think she meant harm to my daughter. I think she meant to have the child in the room. I think she had decided that if she was going to stand up in front of 400 people and describe a woman who had produced a child as an instrument, then the instrument needed to be visible. And a small girl in a good dress at the front of a room is the most persuasive thing in the world if you get to say what she is. At 9:03, Matilda Ardagh went up onto the dais. She spoke for 6 minutes, and it was, I have to say it, magnificent. 19,000 people, 100 years of the foundation. The city that answered when it was asked. And then she brought it down to a single family, and she said that the family in question was her own, and she said her daughter's name out loud in that room for the first time in public since the diagnosis, and 400 people made the sound 400 people make. And then she turned it. She said that in the course of this campaign, a match had been found. She said that the match was a child. She said, carefully, in the tone of a woman forced into candor by circumstance, that the child had been entered into the drive by an employee of the hospital who had a prior relationship with the family, that the family had been given no notice, and that the foundation would of course be reviewing how such a thing had been permitted to occur under its own banner. She did not say my name. She did not have to. There were people at those tables who had been at St. Aldhelm's 4 years earlier, and she said, with real grief in her voice, that she had spent 4 years protecting her daughter from precisely this, and that she was sorry to say it in this room, but that she was not going to watch her child be used. I was standing at the back in scrubs, and I want to tell you that I strode down that room. What actually happened is that I could not move at all for about 8 seconds, and the thing that moved me was not courage. It was that I looked across the atrium and saw my daughter's face, and Billy was looking around at all the turning heads and had begun to understand that something in the room was about her, and her chin had gone. I have never cared less about a room in my life. I got to the front. Somebody tried to put a hand on my arm, and Aggie Moreland removed it. And I stood at the foot of the dais in surgical scrubs at a black tie gala with a document wallet under my arm, and I said, loudly enough to reach the back, "My name is Nell Faraday, and I would like to answer that, please, because my daughter is in this room, and she is going to hear the answer." The quartet had stopped. It was extremely quiet. Matilda Ardagh looked down at me from a dais for the second time in my life and said, with perfect composure, that this was neither the time nor the place. And I said, "You brought my 3-year-old here in a car. You made it the place." And then I did the only thing I know how to do. I read out what was in front of me. I said I signed a parental consent form on the 16th of November at a public drive in this atrium. Here it is, my handwriting, my address, 2 witnesses, and I would like everybody to notice what is not written anywhere on it, in any field, in any margin. The name Ardagh. A woman doing what I have just been accused of writes that name down. It is the entire mechanism. It is not there because it never once entered my head. I said, "I did not process that sample. Here is the intake log from the National Registry Laboratory 200 miles from this building. Obtained under a formal request in my own name 9 days ago. My name does not appear on any line of it. 14 people handled that swab, and I am not one of them." I said, "The foundation announced this campaign on the 12th of November with no name attached to it, and here is the foundation's own published timeline saying so." My daughter was swabbed on the 16th. So on the day I signed that form, there was no possible way for me to know whose life it was for, unless somebody had told me. And the only person alive who could have told me had not spoken one word to me in 4 years. And then I stopped, because the next part was not about me. And I had to decide in front of 400 people whether I was going to say it. I said, 4 years ago, I wrote to Séverine Ardagh by hand, 4 pages, to tell her I was pregnant. I sent it recorded delivery to this address. I was told, in a corridor outside my flat, by the woman standing on that dais, that she had read it. She had not. Here is the mail register of this building, signed in on the 11th of January, received by Monsieur Ardagh, with a remark in the night matron's own hand, collected by chair, not forwarded, queried, And here is Mrs. Moreland's covering statement lodged formally with the records office of this hospital 8 days ago. I held it up, not to the room, to the dais, and I said the last thing, and I said it as flatly as I have ever said anything, because it was the only one that was going to cost me. I said, Séverine Ardagh was declined the chance to know my daughter for 4 years, and when she was finally told 11 days ago, she refused the transplant in writing before she had ever laid eyes on her. She wrote that a 3-year-old is not a resource. So whatever this is, it is not what you have just described to this room, because the only 2 people who could possibly be running the scheme you are describing have both independently refused the thing the scheme is supposed to be for. There was a sound in that atrium that I have never heard before or since. Not a gasp. 400 people all deciding something at the same time makes a kind of low structural noise, like a building shifting. And Matilda Ardagh said, quietly, into a live microphone, that letter was not addressed to me. It is the only unforced error I ever saw her make. She meant it as a defense. I was not the intended recipient. This is a private family matter. And what 400 people heard was a confession of the receipt. And then a door opened at the north end of the atrium. I did not see her come in. I had my back to it. I knew because of the faces. 400 faces all moving at once. And then Aggie Moreland's hand closing on my arm again. And then the sound of a wheelchair on marble, which is a small squeaking noise that in a silent room is enormous. They had brought her down from the 9th floor. She had, I found out afterwards, discharged herself against advice from the ward at 10 to 9 on the arm of a staff nurse who I hope was never disciplined for it, because a colleague had gone up to tell her what was being said downstairs. She was in a wheelchair because she could not do the distance, and she had made them stop it 20 feet short, and she got out of it. Séverine Ardagh stood up out of a wheelchair in the middle of the Ardagh Foundation Winter Gala, 38 years old, in a coat over hospital clothes, with a cannula still taped to the back of her left hand, and walked the last 20 feet on her own. And it took a long time, and nobody in that room made a sound. She went past me. I want to be honest, I thought she would stop and she did not, and for 1 second I thought I had lost. She went past me and up the 2 steps onto the dais, which cost her something, and she stood beside her mother in front of the microphone, and she put 2 fingers to the inside of her own left wrist, and pressed, and let go. And she said, "Everything she has just told you is true. I would like to add the part she does not know. She told them she left the wedding. She said the date, and she said the reason out loud, in a room with press in it, which she had spent 4 years and an enormous amount of money making sure nobody could do. She said she had been diagnosed with a heritable marrow failure 5 days before, and that she had been advised. She used the word advised, and she did not look at her mother when she used it, that the decent thing was to end it cleanly rather than tie a 23-year-old to a woman who was going to need nursing. And she said, I took that advice. It was the worst decision of my life, and I made it in 4 hours, and it took 4 years to find out what it cost. And then she said, 3 weeks ago, I instructed the foundation solicitors. I want the board to hear it from me and not from a letter. I did not know about this. I want that clear. This is the 6th thing, the one I did not build and did not know about, and I found out about it standing at the foot of a dais in scrubs. She had gone to the solicitors 11 days after she learned Billy existed, before the 4th Tuesday, before any of the trouble, and she had lodged a signed statement. It acknowledged Wilhelmina Faraday as her daughter. It recorded, in her own words, that she had declined the donation and that no one had asked her to. And it stated, in a sentence, her solicitor apparently argued with her about for some time, that Nell Faraday had at no point requested any provision of any kind from her or from the Ardagh estate, and that if any claim of that nature were ever made after her death, it should be understood to have originated with somebody other than Nell Faraday. She had written a document to protect us from her own family, 3 weeks before her own family did the thing she was protecting us from, and she had not mentioned it to me on any of the 6 Tuesdays because, she told me later, she had not wanted it to look like an offer. Then Séverine Ardagh came down off the dais, 2 steps, badly, holding the rail, and she walked to where my daughter was standing beside Aggie Moreland in the good dress with her chin gone, and she got down on the floor of that atrium in front of 400 people, all the way down onto one knee, and then further, until she was level with the 3-year-old. And Billy, who had been about 90 seconds from crying, looked at her and said, clearly, in the voice of a child stating an obvious fact for the benefit of some slow adults, "That is my other mother." And Séverine said, "Yes, I am." And then she looked up from the floor at 400 people, and she said the words that I have replayed more times than I have replayed anything in my life. She said, "This is my daughter. Her name is Wilhelmina Faraday, and she is 3 years old, and she has been in this city her entire life, 4 streets from this building, and that is her mother. And I was going to marry her, and I did not. And every single thing that went wrong afterwards is mine. Nobody in this room is to say one word about either of them, ever, for any reason. Not while I'm alive, not after." Then she put her hand out to me from the floor without looking, the way you do with somebody you have known a long time. And I took it, and I got down onto the marble in surgical scrubs beside my daughter and the woman who left me at an altar. And the 3 of us stayed there while 400 people did not know what to do with themselves. Matilda Ardagh left the atrium at 4 minutes past 10. She has never publicly retracted anything, and she has never publicly repeated it either. There is one more piece, and it is the piece that lets me tell this story with the ending it has. 11 days after the gala, the coordinator's office telephoned. They had a match. Not my daughter. An adult, a full 10 out of 10, a 24-year-old bus driver from the north of the city, who had swabbed his cheek at a shopping center stand in the 2nd week of the campaign because there was a queue and he was early for a shift. He came up clean on every marker. He did it without hesitating, and he asked for nothing. And he has met her exactly once afterwards, at his own request, for about 10 minutes. I want you to sit with that because I have. The campaign that Matilda Ardagh built with one hand is the thing that saved her daughter's life. 19,000 people opened their mouths for 30 seconds because she asked the city properly. And one of them was a match. She did that. It was real. And it was hers. And it worked. And the letter she took out of the mail register and destroyed without reading is the thing that nearly cost her everything she was trying to protect. Both hands, the same woman. I've stopped trying to resolve it into one thing, because people are not one thing, and the truest sentence I know about Matilda Ardagh is that she was capable of saving a life at scale and incapable of opening an envelope with my handwriting on it. Billy never donated. She was never evaluated, never anesthetized, never so much as taken into a clinic room for it. The only thing my daughter ever gave to that family was 30 seconds of a cheek swab in an atrium for a sticker of a rocket. And the only thing it ever did was tell the truth. The transplant was in the February. It went the way those things go, which is to say it was long and ugly. And there were 4 weeks in the middle where I read her counts every single day properly, this time with permission as her next of kin. And there was one night in the 3rd week where I sat in a corridor at 3 in the morning and did not think she was going to be there in the morning. She was. Day 29 the graph took. I was the one who told her, because I was the one who saw the numbers first, and I brought the printout in and held it up to the light in her room the way Nan taught me, and I said, "That is not yours. That is his. It's working." And Séverine Ardagh looked at a piece of paper full of numbers she could not read and said, "You are certain?" And I said, "I was certain about your marrow at 2 in the morning 11 days before a machine agreed with me." "Yes, I am certain." She got out in the April. She was not the same for a long time, and in some ways, she never will be. There are things she cannot do now. She gets tired in a way that is not dramatic and does not go away. We did not get married for 2 years. That was mine, not hers, and she never once pushed. I needed to know that what I felt was not gratitude and not relief, and not the residue of being 23. And I needed to watch her be an ordinary tired person for a long time before I trusted it. She waited. She was extraordinarily good at waiting, which she should have been, having spent 4 years practicing the wrong version of it. We did it in a registry office with 9 people. Aggie Moreland was one of them. Tam Okafor was one of them. Billy, who was 5.5 by then, and had firm views, wore a dinosaur on her dress on purpose. I had Nan's brass comparator in my pocket, not sewn into a hip this time, in my pocket where I could get at it. I run the department now. That is the other thing that happened. And I mention it because Nan spent 31 years in a basement finding things for other people to sign. And her granddaughter's name is on the door. I have 3 people working nights who I have told, individually, that if they see something in a tube that the machine has not said yet, they are to come and tell me, and I will listen to them properly. And I will never once take it upstairs with my own name on it. Billy is 8. She has honey-colored hair and amber eyes, and she is unbearable about dinosaurs. She knows the whole story in the age-appropriate installments it came in, and the part she cares about is not the atrium and not the gala. The part she cares about is that she was a 10 out of 10, which she considers a personal athletic achievement and which she mentions to strangers. I have thought a great deal about what I would say to a woman standing in a cold vestry in a dress with her grandmother sewn into the hip, if I could get to her. I do not think I would tell her it turns out all right, because that would spoil it, and she would not believe me anyway. I think I would tell her the thing Nan told me on a milk crate at a kitchen table, which turned out to be about very much more than a tube under a lamp. Blood doesn't lie about where it came from. People will. People will lie to your face at a conversational volume for 4 years, and they will do it while genuinely believing they are being kind. And they will take an envelope out of a mail register and put it in a bag. But the thing itself keeps the record. It cannot help it. My daughter's marrow said Ardagh in a laboratory 200 miles away, run by people who had never heard of any of us. And nothing anybody said in that atrium could make it say anything else. Séverine said one thing to me on the night of the gala, afterwards, when the room was empty and the staff were stacking the round tables, and the 3 of us were still sitting on the floor because none of us could face standing up. She said it looking at Billy asleep against my shoulder in the good dress. She said, "I spent 4 years dying quietly so that you would not have to watch it. And you were 3 streets away the whole time, raising the reason I get to live." I did not have anything to say to that. I still do not, really. So I did the only useful thing I have ever known how to do. I reached over and put 2 fingers on the inside of her left wrist and pressed and felt what was there and did not let go.